So you just finished up the season finale, episode 10 of Lovecraft Country, and desperately want to talk about what happened in this episode, especially the last 15 minutes, and where this leads into a potential season 2. Well, don't worry, you are in the right place. Welcome to JBuck Studios, your home for reviews, reactions, and ridiculousness. And yes, we are jumping in to episode 10 of Lovecraft Country, the season finale. Who knows, again, like I said, if there's going to be a season 2, but this episode was wild. But before I get into my spoiler-free kind of thoughts, before we jump into the spoilers and really break this down, what did you all think of this episode? Was this a competent, wonderful, perfect finish to this 10-episode season 1 run, or was there something missing, some things that you really wanted to be tied up a little bit more? I want to know in the comments down below. But without further ado, let's get into my spoiler-free thoughts of this episode. I thought this episode, one, it is jam-packed. There is a lot going on. There's a lot of different aspects hitting off, a lot of characters going through, doing their own storylines and whatnot that connect to everyone else. I like that. I do think that it's a little bit bloated. I will say that off the top of my head. It is a little bit bloated because it's like, wait, where did that come from? Who's going on there? But the thing is, it comes together in this grand finish, essentially, like this Avengers Endgame team-up type finish. That's all I'm going to say for the spoiler-free thoughts. But also the music, the musical score in the background, like the chanting, and then almost reminiscent of kind of, throwback, almost Indiana Jones when they're doing kind of adventure stuff as well for the musical score. That was one of the things that popped out to myself. But now we're getting into the spoilers of this episode. So this episode, episode 10, was wonderful. This was a fantastic mixture of literally all of the different genres from the different episodes that we had gotten in the previous 9 episodes, boiled down into this essentially 10th episode climax and whatnot. And it starts off with Dee, still worrying about the arm and the curse and whatnot that they had kind of tried to take care of at the end of episode 9. Now they have the Book of Names, and Letty and Atticus. The Book of Names has the birthmark of Atticus, and, obviously Letty is pregnant. So they fly into kind of this different realm, essentially. They're seeing Hannah and then also the other woman that is Atticus's grandmother, I believe. And it's them talking to Letty and Atticus about the birthright and the Book of Names, and now the binding process, and you are now the protector of the Book of Names, and this and that, and having the fire that goes from generation to generation. There is, again, a lot of essentially lore that is packed into about 5 to 10 minutes, but I think it ties up everything from even episode 1 and whatnot with that kind of flashback and whatnot that Atticus has. So that is kind of the setup of it, but they are able to remove 99% of the curse that Dee has on her, the arm and whatnot. They're able to transform her back into her normal self, but the arm, the decrepit arm, is still a problem, which, spoiler, we're going to find out what happens to it at the end of this episode. So that's kind of the setup of this episode, and then everyone branches off to do their own thing. Ruby is confronting and talking with Christina, and there's kind of, which way is Ruby going to go? Is she going with her family and friends, or is she sticking with Christina and kind of the person that has been her almost loved one, significant other throughout this season? So you can see that she's very conflicted, but she's supposed to get blood from Christina, therefore being able to use it in the binding process throughout that. And you find out that Ruby and Christina, there's kind of a potential scuffle. I'll say that before we jump ahead a little bit. But the other way we're going with this is Atticus and Letty. It is awesome. They're throwing some badass music on, and it's them kind of going through, everything that we've seen throughout this season. Atticus making sure that the monster in the basement, literally the monster in the basement, is okay and calmed. They take the elevator down back into essentially that ancient museum temple or whatnot that they broke into in the previous season episode, I think 4 it was. And they do a ritual. But the cool thing is, and unique thing that I didn't even know was possible, was that they brought back Titus for this episode. We actually see him, and it's them kind of fighting back and forth, and they need something from him, but their curse or spell isn't strong enough, and he disappears, but reappears in front of Ruby and Christina. And Christina now finds out, because Titus says it before he reimagines back into this salt temple, seance circle, essentially, is that the group, Atticus and Letty and them, have the Book of Names. So now Christina is definitely on their trail. But the crazy thing is, man, they just beat him up and chop them up, and it's because you find out that through that binding process, they need 3 different kind of bloodlines or people, Atticus being one, the flesh of Titus that they rip off there in that scene is one, but then also the blood of Christina is the third one, which that's where Ruby comes in. She's supposed to be tasked with getting the blood from her and then bringing it to them to use back in Artem at the end of this episode, to essentially use it as the binding process where they are all safe, the Book of Names is theirs, and nothing bad can happen to them. But because of this Titus sighting by Christina, she knows that there's something amiss, goes back to them, tries to get the, Book of the Names, says that what she is doing, trying to get her invulnerability, is what she needs to do. Atticus, I'm sorry, but you got to sacrifice yourself to me to, carry on the birthright and whatnot. But throughout this process, obviously she doesn't get the Book of Names, but she does take the mark of Cain, that invulnerability that Letty has. So now she is essentially not helpless, but she no longer has that invulnerability throughout this episode and season, essentially. And before we get into the grand finish of this episode, which is the best part, the last 20-15 minutes, whatnot, Dee again talks to Hippolyta. She says that she can't draw, her arm is decrepit, but Hippolyta, obviously we know that she's gone in the future, she's seen all these crazy things, she is a genius, essentially. She says that each almost universe or time parallel is a source of time, and if you wait or jump over to a different one, there's a different outcome, essentially, hinting at, again, fixing Dee's arm throughout this episode, or getting her back to essentially the time and place that she wants to be. And then one last thing is Gia and Atticus finally meet up. They kind of make amends and says that Gia, we need your help. You're a crazy nine-tails fox woman that's going to murder a lot of people. We need your help to come on this journey. And then it is this very kind of inspirational, fun look at seeing the progress of all of our characters getting together, the group, getting the car, getting the travel guide all set up, like the shop. You see that they've come quite a bit of a ways in this season. And then they go on a fun car ride. I mean, it's not really a fun car ride, but they make it fun because they're all singing, they're having a good time, they're bopping. You see the community that these characters, again, they're all kind of weird outcasts. I mean, we got a fox lady, we have invulnerability, we have a guy that's a sorcerer, we have an alcoholic, I guess. I don't know if that's a superpower, but we have all of them in a car going back out to Artem. And back out at Artem is where essentially everything lets loose. Everyone is hitting off on their own specific tasks to make this binding process work. Atticus eats the flesh, drinks the blood. It's very gross and whatnot, but it sets him up for that bonding process. However, you find out that Ruby and Letty are going and setting up in the tower from, I think, episode 2, all of these different kind of symbols and runes and whatnot to, again, help with the binding process and whatnot. But you find out through their conversation something is amiss, and that Ruby is actually Christina. They did, obviously, the body swap and everything like that. So from what it sounds like, Ruby is dead, more than likely probably in a coma. But then Letty is obviously upset about this, fights with Ruby and whatnot, and they're going back and forth, obviously proving that the blood that Atticus took was not actually Christina's blood, so we got a problem there. And Letty is thrown out of the tower, obviously no longer invulnerable, and smashes against the ground. Obviously a big problem right there, because Letty is essentially dead. And then Montrose, Gia, and Hippolyta are trying to set up, the salt seance on the bridge and whatnot, but all of these kind of servants and white people from back in the day that I'm believing Christina brought back into the mix to help her are essentially goons, and capture them, beat them up, and take them back to where Atticus is, where now Christina is, and they're setting up the ritual essentially for Christina, the Aunjanue equinox, for her to become invulnerable. And that is where you find out a lot of crazy things are going on, because essentially Atticus is just getting sliced open. Somehow Letty comes back to life, makes it there just in time to find or see Atticus. They mouth "I love you" back and forth, and then Atticus dies. Therefore Christina is invulnerable and whatnot. But it's a quick thing, because we find out that they use the binding spell to get rid of Christina, to make sure that the power is all theirs. But obviously Christina is like, no, you can't, haha, Atticus didn't drink my blood, like, it's not gonna work. However, there still needs to be some sort of a connection, and this is where Gia jumps into the mix, uses her 9 tails and whatnot, holds on to Atticus, holds on to Christina, along with the equinox, like shadowy stuff going out to the moon, and essentially the invulnerability is taken away from her in a big explosion. That's the end of this episode. But throughout that kind of Gia and Christina and Atticus being connected, you see glimpses of past things that kind of had happened that did not show up in the episode, that I'll get into a little bit later. But we find out that Atticus dies. He dies in this episode, and they do an emotional thing and kind of carry him away. And then it is revealed that through those flashbacks, the few things that were revealed are that Montrose, or Hippolyta, was given a letter from Atticus to Montrose, because Atticus knew that essentially through this process, through this ritual, he was going to die. So he knew that all of this was going to happen, gave Montrose a letter to essentially give him a send-off, protect this family, protect his son, protect the book of names and everything like that. So that was in a very emotional finish, because it shows all of our characters carrying him back to the station wagon essentially. But those glimpses of things that happened in the past very much reveal themselves. Also, another thing is Dee being able to kind of control the monster, which we find out at the very end of the episode. I'm going to hold off on that. But then we get some more glimpses at Ruby looking down on Letty, which we can assume the reason Letty came back to life, even though she didn't have the mark of Cain, is that Christina actually put a spell on her to bring her back, because she didn't actually want to kill her. There was some good in Christina still. I think that's the reason why Letty came back. She obviously does get the mark of Cain at the end of this episode. But looking through that quick glance, is you see Ruby looking down on Letty, and I'm assuming that's how she came back to life. But, Dee and the monster. When this episode rounds out, Dee shows back up to where Christina is essentially dying, but she's still somewhat alive. You find out that Dee no longer has her arm. Hippolyta was able to use this future tech and whatnot to graft a robotic arm on her. Like, this is the coolest thing, I think, of this whole season, of this whole episode. Everything that is going on is now that we have, like, future tech in the 50s, and she is just badass, because she didn't have a good arm, has a robotic arm, and chokes and, I'm assuming kills Christina. Like, her neck explodes in blood. So you get this glimpse of Dee now being kind of the protector of these monsters, along with a robot arm. Like, where the hell does this go? Like, this episode ends in a way that this is almost a superhero, almost a Monster Squad finish, essentially, because we have Hippolyta, who is a genius, we have Letty, who is invulnerable, we have Dee, who is like a robot, we have a monster, and then I guess Montrose, who is an alcoholic or protector, essentially. His powers are a little bit less than everyone else, but this sets up so much crap for this next season. Like, where is this going to go? What exactly is the robot arm going to mean for the future of this season and episodes and whatnot? Like, I am very, very curious. I will say that there are a handful of little tiny things that I didn't feel like they really wrapped up, like, for example, I think back in episode 4, the siren that Montrose killed, we didn't really get a reason why and whatnot. Like, it happened, but we didn't get, like, it didn't really connect to anything else. So I think that there are a few little tiny things that kind of slip through the cracks. But overall, this 10 episodes, really enjoyed. Sure, there are a few that kind of missed the mark or were a little bit lesser because I didn't understand the different genres and topics and kind of framework that each episode was really going for, rather than one cohesive story. Otherwise, this altogether sets up a way crazy what the hell is going on world and lore and everything like that. So I am very much excited for season 2. But what did you all think of this episode 10, the first season, I guess, everything in this episode and this season? I want to know in the comments down below. What did I miss? What really stood out to you? What was really cool about this? Like, again, I think the robot arm is the coolest thing for myself because I'm into weird sci-fi stuff like that. But anyways, though, let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. Anyways, though, as always, thank you so much for watching. Watch some more videos up there or right over there. You know, brand new content every single week here on the JBuck Studios channel. I appreciate all of you watching these 10 episode breakdowns that I've been bringing you for the last couple months. Follow all of my social media down there, like this video, subscribe to the JBuck Studios channel, and until next time, we'll see you later.